Welcome to the online learning channel. My name is Brad and I'm going to be assisting you guys today with English, specifically focusing on the grade 12 curriculum. And for today's purposes, we're going to be looking at the aspect of writing and presenting when it comes to English, with the focus of elaborating and discussing the notion of essays. So I have a PowerPoint presentation that I'd like to share with you today that will just guide us in the process of not only discussing what it means to actually write an essay in English, but ultimately what it means to plan, to draft, and then of course to finally edit your essay in order to produce the final product. So without further ado, let us begin. So, as mentioned, the focus for today is going to be on writing and presenting, specifically when it comes to essays. And as you'll notice at the top of the slide, it makes mention of the use of language, structures, and conventions that shall essentially guide you in the process of just formulating your final product and presenting your essay in its entirety. So now when it comes to essays and when it comes to the idea of what it means to plan and to produce an actual essay itself, there are a couple of aspects that we need to keep in mind. So essentially, it does require a fair amount of planning. It then requires one to piece together a draft copy, and then essentially, if there are any aspects of the actual essay that need to be edited or need to be, say, just slightly manipulated or changed in whatever capacity it may be, that process then takes place, to which, and of course, you produce your final essay. So when it comes to the actual writing of essays and presenting essays, we are going to be focusing on the language structures that one can be made aware of in planning this particular, say, process, and then of course looking at various conventions that can allow one to also just execute the essay at the end of the day. So now when it comes to language structures and conventions, as mentioned, it incorporates the idea of planning, drafting, and editing the actual essay itself. So now, why do we do this? This is the question we need to ask ourselves. Well, it's the examiner that ultimately is now looking for these aspects to be evident within your essays. So the examiner wants to see that you have put an effort into this particular piece of writing. So how do we do that? So one has to begin the writing process with ultimately a mind map or a spider diagram or a paragraph plan. This should then capture the essence of your ideas on your chosen topic and the structure of your essay at the end of the day. So how your story will unfold. So this is a good kind of method to make use of when it comes to just planning your actual essay. So an example that's being made mention of here in the slide, 5 waiters in the hotel. In the first paragraphs, this creates the setting. So you could ask yourself the question, when, where, who, what, why, how. This will assist you in ultimately planning your actual essay if you are given a topic such as the one mentioned here. So now when it comes to making use of mind maps, I would strongly encourage you as students to make use of a mind map. It just allows you to piece together your thoughts and your ideas on paper, and just gives you a stronger sense as to how exactly you're going to structure your essay and what you're going to mention first and foremost within the introduction, for instance, what will then be elaborated on in the body of the actual essay, and then of course what you will then conclude with in the actual conclusion. So it just allows you to vocalize and essentially write down your thoughts on paper. All right, so with regards to language and structures and conventions, you get various types that essentially one can make use of in terms of just presenting the actual essay. So you need to focus on aspects such as register, style, and voice. This is the tone and the style that you make use of or that you utilize within your actual essay. The word choice is, well, goes without saying, it has to be pretty much on point in order for you to achieve the most amount of marks possible. Sentence construction, especially when it comes to things like grammar, needs to be kept in mind, and punctuation. Paragraph writing, one needs to bear in mind what an actual paragraph is and what it means to structure your paragraphs and leave adequate spacing between various points being made. And then, as mentioned earlier, punctuation and spelling is just going to earn you that extra bit of credit at the end of the day. Okay, so we're going to be focusing on register to begin with. So when it comes to register, we need to understand what exactly does register refer to. So register is essentially the tone that you make use of in your actual, say, essay. So how you come across to the reader, and the style essentially that you make use of. So the way that you convey your message. This must be appropriate at the end of the day. It must be appropriate in the sense that it refers to the actual topic, and it's done in a kind of professional manner is the word that comes to mind at first, but essentially you want it to be a well-constructed piece that does not make use of any kind of colloquial language or any kind of, say, jargons that are going to be far removed from the actual topic itself. So when it comes to the actual piece, your writing must be formal, and therefore all grammar rules must still be obeyed. So this is a good rule of thumb to adhere to when it comes to writing your essay. Avoid any kind of contractions or any use of slang. This often is not going to stand you in good stead, especially considering that the examiner at a grade 12 level is going to look for a strong sense of maturity being evident within your essays. So I've just shared an example here with you of what could be considered an informal, say, piece of writing, one that is not typically going to be acceptable, if you will, by an examiner in terms of the use of formal language. So, as you can see, the particular example goes as follows. I and my chommies checked out the chicks at the local joints. It's where I met a lot of interesting people, PPL, but the highlight is when I met you, just the letter U. She was hot and I fell in love. Okay, so as you can see, one would need to make mention of the fact that in this particular piece, the use of punctuation and grammar is not exactly at an appropriate level. So we need to now look at the errors in the actual paragraph above, and we need to pinpoint where these errors are quite evident. So for instance, the word chommies is not necessarily going to be acceptable in a matric level essay. So with regards to the example, I'll just have it there for you once again to make reference or to have it as a reference. And now if we were to analyze this particular example, so this is a case of now rewriting this paragraph in a way that is acceptable. So I, to begin with, always include other people first in a sentence, okay? My chommies, slang, always unacceptable. Friends and I checked out the chicks, watched. Note that you have started your essay in the past tense, the girls at the local shop. It was where I met a lot of many interesting people or engaging, vibrant people. But the highlights, of course, this is a spelling error, is when I met you. Okay, so that's just a couple of points that you could be making mention of when it comes to assessing or analyzing this particular piece. So now when it comes to the final product, my friends and I watched the girls at the local shop. It was where I met many interesting people, but the highlight was when I met you. Okay, so the writing style refers to the diction, the use of words in context, and the use of appropriate imagery as well. So again, when it comes to appropriate imagery, just think about something that can be considered, PC, if you will, just appropriate in the context of whatever is being discussed. For example, look at the two sentences below. Which sentence is more appealing? And you need to ask yourself the question, why? Okay, so the next aspect that we're going to be focusing on when it comes to language structures and conventions is the style that you make use of in your actual writing piece. So now when it comes to style, this is the tone, how you come across to the reader, and style, the way you convey your message must be appropriate. Okay, so the way you convey your message and the way that you come across to the reader, very important aspects to bear in mind. So for example, the writing must be formal and therefore all grammar rules must still be obeyed. Avoid any kind of contractions or slang. For example, the man walked into the room and stared at his wife. Okay, so this is the style that's being utilized in this example. How can we elaborate? So what does it mean to write a creative, original, or authentic piece? Because again, this is going to tie in with the actual style that you'll make use of. You need to make use of what's known as conventions. Okay, so with regards to conventions, a couple of approaches you can take to this particular example. In this particular example, you need to provide context as to why the man has walked into the room and proceeded to stare at his wife. You can't just merely settle on the fact that he has walked into the room and stared at his wife. Provide context and provide reason. add a fitting description that attests to the nature of the stare. Clearly, this is a dramatic moment for whatever reason it may be, and the consequent environment that's now being created as a result of the stare. Elaborate on what could potentially follow this initial encounter, because again, staring at one's wife, that just leaves the reader in a kind of, leaves them in a kind of limbo, if you will, doesn't really elaborate on what could be potentially following this encounter. So you need to familiarize yourself with the language that's being utilized, the style, together with the editing component of the rubric. This is often shared with students beforehand so that they can get a sense as to how the examiner would typically mark this. But always bear in mind that grammar, spelling, and punctuation are going to be key aspects that you need to execute effectively. So the final effort when it comes to this particular example, the agitated man, okay, walked angrily into the quiet room. He stared at his wife with a steely gaze that heated the already tense room. At this moment, her colleague stood up. So you can see how we've elaborated on the context and the actual style within this particular piece, just to give it a little bit more of a kind of storyline feel, as opposed to just a once-off sentence that doesn't leave the viewers or the readers with any kind of sense as to what exactly is taking place here. Okay, so when it comes to sentence construction and paragraph writing, you must bear in mind that when it comes to sentence construction, we need to make use of effective language. So it's important that your paragraphs are well structured. This is a crucial aspect to your essay writing. It's unacceptable at this stage of the game not to use paragraphs. When I mention this stage of the game, I'm obviously referring to your matric year. You would have had adequate training up until this point in time and teachings that would now essentially have prepared you for what is going to be a very clean and well-polished product at the end of the day. This is essentially basic English 101. But at the end of the day, there are a significant amount of common errors that learners make when writing essays, especially when it comes to structuring their paragraphs and the language that they make use of. So a couple of the errors that some students may present based on experience and past teachings. Just got a couple of examples to share with you guys today. So the common splice error. Okay, so when it comes to the common splice error, what does this exactly refer to? So just to make use of an example, the boy ran onto the field with great enthusiasm. This was his defining moment. He was putting it all on the field, his heart, his soul, and his love for his school. Okay, so that's the initial paragraph that we are now dealing with. So now if we were to make use of the common splice error or identify this particular error, the boy ran onto the field with great enthusiasm. This was his defining moment. He was putting it all on the field, making use of the common splice, his heart, his soul, and his love for his school. Okay, so that would be more appropriate in this particular context. So the incorrect use of or lack of punctuation often leads to long, rambling-like sentences where the meaning becomes often obscure or unclear, which then can, of course, lead to a poor mark in the language component of that particular paper. The dangling participle, so say for instance X, let's say that X's name is Mark, speeding down the hallway, the door to his maths class came into view. And in fact, it's Jabu in this particular case. So making use of the dangling participle as Jabu was speeding down the hallway, the door to his maths class came into view. A bit more of an appropriate use of language construction. Errors in concord. So the pronoun, learners should do their homework in order for them to pass grade 12. Okay, so that's a clear and confined statement. So perhaps making use of a pronoun that just gives it a little bit more context. One, they must realize that his or her homework is a crucial part of the revision program. So as to suggest that this particular speaker that's now addressing the students is now listing a couple of approaches that they can take in order to succeed in their grade 12 year. So the subject-verb agreement, the class of learners are going to the excursion next Friday. Okay, so language use and context, just another example for you guys, just to put things in perspective. So now, whilst the use of quotations and non-English language phrases adds to the interest of your potential viewers or readers, and of course your writing, it must be appropriately used in context. So here's an example of an appropriate and meaningful use of a common South African phrase. In this particular case, the phrase is "eish," and a French expression, déjà vu. So "eish," just briefly speaking, could refer to the idea of one being surprised or taken aback by an actual, say, experience that catches them by surprise, or in other contexts, it could be a kind of response that one has when they are not necessarily satisfied with whatever outcome they may be witnessing. In this particular case, the use of déjà vu is referring to the idea that one is now recalling memories from the past in a present-like context that may now be repeating themselves in a way that suggests that they are now experiencing the same thoughts and the same ideas and the same experiences to that which took place many, many years or months or weeks or days prior. Okay, so the two terms, "eish" and "déjà vu," these are the two phrases we need to keep in mind that are now going to be used appropriately in the context of this particular speech. So here we go. Clive was feeling anxious. He knew that Mr. Topela had seen him. He was unable to get out of this tricky situation. Eish. He was caught and there was no way out. It was déjà vu. Mr. Topela will call me into his office yet again. My parents will be called and my year will play out as a series of tragedies. Okay, so in this particular case, we've avoided any use of profanity or obscene language. We've just made use of two common phrases in South African and French language just to describe the experience that, in this case, Clive is having in response to Mr. Tobela's treatment or consequent punishment in this particular case. Okay, so a couple of further aspects of language structures and conventions to be aware of. Code switching. You may use a quotation or expression from another language to enhance your writing, but this should be included in quotation marks, as you saw with "eish" and "déjà vu, and you should include the English translation in parenthesis. So any kind of idiomatic expressions that you could also be making use of, you should add interesting imagery, emotive words, and choose better words to enhance your writing. This just gives the examiner a more, say, well-rounded view of what exactly you are attempting to present. So the following may now assist you in improving your actual writing. A couple of tips that will assist you, especially when it comes to planning, drafting, and editing your actual, say, essays. So first and foremost, coherency. Now, when we say coherency, this is essentially referring to the idea that throughout the course of your essay, it needs to flow, needs to make, say, logical and sequential sense. If that rings any bells, it can't be a case of bouncing from one idea or one point to the other without any kind of clear and, say, consistent structure to the piece. So now in writing, paragraphs should flow. There should be links from one paragraph to the next, and within paragraphs, often is the case that what learners could do is they could refer back to the actual question in some cases within the actual paragraph, just to give it some order and some structure. You need to organize your ideas, courtesy of the mind maps. That's a good technique to make use of in order for the marker to be able to follow your story or your message. So continuity words, contrasting words, conclusion-like words, these can all be incorporated into your essays. Similarly, moreover, additionally, likewise, in the same way, however, but, although, despite, nonetheless, rather than, also, or like, and thus, therefore, hence, in conclusion, in summary. So continuity words, similarly, moreover, additionally, likewise, in the same way, contrasting words, however, but, although, despite, and then conclusion-like words, thus, therefore, hence, in conclusion. Okay, so understanding of topic sentences. So just another example that I'd like to share with you guys, just to illustrate this notion of topic sentences and what they mean to us as students and, of course, as examiners. So for instance, to make use of the example that we mentioned earlier, Clive was clearly feeling anxious. He knew that Mr. Tobela had seen him. He was unable to get out of his tricky situation. Ish. He was caught and there was no way out. It was deja vu. Mr. Tobela will call me into his office yet again. My parents will be called and my year will play out as a series of tragedies. So every new idea needs a new paragraph. So look at the above paragraph again. Notice the different sentences, types, and lengths. It often grabs your attention and makes your writing interesting. Use shorter sentences, especially for your topic or introductory sentences. This can serve to enhance or affect the emotion and interest in your writing. Okay, so for example, I'm leaving, sobbed Mavis. Use proper nouns or names rather than pronouns. Rather than I'm leaving, she sobbed, you could say I'm leaving, sobbed Mavis. Use one sentence paragraphs for effect. This emphasizes a point and works well in the anti-climax or climax of your essay because it slows down the pace of your writing and builds up in a more emotive response in the actual reader. So another explanation that I'd like to offer you guys, bearing the use of punctuation. For example, you can add things like rhetorical questions, end with a question mark, use an exclamation mark, use parenthesis or ellipsis, etc. You can also hold one word in a sentence in capitals, e.g., this is my classroom. This is my classroom. Help, help, help. Which one appears to be the loudest if you were to look at these examples? Remember, one word and not every word in capitals. Be creative in your essays. Offer your creativity. Offer your uniqueness. Often, just gives the examiner a little bit more respite in terms of just going through, paper after paper. Something that stands out every now and then is always a refreshing thought. This is perhaps the only place where you can be rewarded for, say, bending the truth or being creative, if you will. So now, in terms of having a distinct link between your introduction and your conclusion, well, with regards to the introduction, we've just made use of an example here. Tom knew that he was in serious trouble. The lie that he had kept secret for so many weeks was about to explode and ruin his life completely. So essentially, in this case, or this example, the body of your essay would now be a series of paragraphs where the story would unfold, and the conclusion, in this particular case, would be a lesson learned. Nothing could change his circumstances. He had to acknowledge that the lie had ruined everything beautiful in his life, and he will never lie again. So the lesson being learned here by Tom, courtesy of this experience. So you need to note the clear distinction between the introduction and the conclusion, and of course the theme or the central focus of this particular piece, the lie itself. So another key point to make mention of, do not have subheadings in your essays. You do need to link the introduction and conclusion, of course, the main body, but please do not do it courtesy of subheadings. The structure of your essay, well, you need to have a golden thread through your essay, as I mentioned earlier. So if lie is the key theme in your essay, for example, try and maintain this theme or this idea in the entire essay. Do not complicate the essay with too many themes or ideas. Remember that you're only writing 2.5 pages and not a 130-page novel at the end of the day. If you want to improve your marks, you can try using different methods to introduce your essay. For example, start with a flashback or a short sentence in reported or direct speech, or a slogan, for instance, just gains the reader's attention. Be original. This should function as a hook, something that grabs the reader's or marker's attention at the end of the day. So imagery is always going to serve you well when it comes to essay writing. In fact, in many respects, it is essential. The use of similes or metaphors or alliteration, these are all forms of punctuation and grammar that will serve you well. Engages the reader in their experience. This also shows your technical skills in English, which is always going to stand you in good stead, and will impress the reader and, of course, the marker themselves. Avoid any kind of cliches. It was a beautiful summer's day. Could more be it could be more along the lines of the red hot smoldering sun parched the African landscape. So that would be a little bit more creative, a little bit more original than, a beautiful summer's day. Using contrasts and relatable associations allows you to get to the point. It also adds clarity to whatever you are describing. For example, rich, poor, tall, short, KwaZulu-Natal, St. Lucia, wetlands, sealand, happy, worried. These can all be pieced together in a nice, concise, and constructive sentence. The rich, moist wetlands of St. Lucia is nothing like my home in Namibia. So the use of power words also can add to the structure of your essay. Strong verbs, adjectives. Try to avoid words such as like, a lot, nice also. So avoid using phrases such as I kinda like her, I like shopping, I really really want to see him, etc. Better phrases would be, I think that I have feelings for her, I enjoy shopping, I'm desperately waiting to see him. He cried like it was his last day. If you can replace like in this case with as if, it makes more sense. You should use as if more so than like. He cried as if it was his last day, just to bring that point forward. The word like usually implies a comparison. So in this particular case, he sings like an angel. Okay, so that would be a more appropriate example of using the word like. Again, no subheadings. So power words, as mentioned earlier, things like resilient, flexible, aggressive, threatening, cascading, appreciative, compassionate, straightforward, wonderful, abrupt, dignified, noble. As you can see, there's a long list of so-called power words that you could make use of to add to the structure of your essay. There could also be tone words evident within your essay. 5 of these words and essentially the meanings that could you could use in your writing. Better words equals better marks. Avoid using comparisons or anecdotes or any kind of references to things like politics, religion, things like sex, for instance, unless you can handle these topics with a strong sense of maturity and sensitivity. The writer, one would like to think that the writer has a good sense or a good knowledge of what exactly they're elaborating on, and the examiner wants them to just focus in on what exactly they have experience with and what exactly they have reflected in their writing. You need to write neatly and legibly. That's always going to stand you in good stead when it comes to essay writing. So hopefully today that you've been now exposed to a couple of ideas, a couple of new methods that could essentially assist you in terms of not only planning your essays, but of course, drafting them and then of course editing them in order to produce the final product. We've gone through a couple of notions of language, conventions and structure of particular pieces that would define your essays, looking at a couple of approaches that could assist you along the way. Just a couple of tips, a couple of pointers, a couple of notes that will serve you well, just in terms of understanding what the examiner is after at the end of the day. Thank you very much for tuning in to today's online learning channel lesson, specifically focusing on English grade 12. I appreciate your viewing, and we will see you next time. Cheers.